Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about the way I use architectural perspective to address standing archaeology. And the focus is upon how people built, why they built that way, and the structure they used. And by way of a start, here is Dalveigh. John Clark of Pennicook did a tour around Scotland, I think it's about 1773, and he did little sketches of houses. So that's him sketching Dalveigh. Look at it closely, you can see there's a small medieval tower there, perhaps 3 stories, and it's been extended beyond that stair tower into a much bigger building of a completely different build, probably late 16th or early 17th century. But in 30 years of the drawing, the house is gone. There's a new one, but look, it's raised up a perron. There's the very large, oversized basement here. The probability is that much of that house is still inside that house. That would be typical, but the raised entrance is one of the clues. I'm not going to go through the list. The great joy is working for people like this. This is a group of us on top of one of these houses, trying to not to fall off. And partly the joy is collaborative working, sharing observations, and above all, certainly somebody of my age, helping hands climbing parapets. Now, it's a bit didactic, and I'm sorry for that, but the time has come really to nail a few things. If we're going to understand what we find in houses, you've got to understand what the origin was. And much of what I'm going to suggest to you is wrong terminology derives from Gibbon and Ross. 1. No Scottish tower bears the slightest resemblance to a Norman keep. 2. The word tower house is a 19th century invention, save one. Robert Sibbald used it once in his description of Stirlingshire, and he used it for one house, and that was Midhope. And no idea what he was talking about. Otherwise, it doesn't appear. Peel, the third one. We know exactly what that is. It's a house of under £100 extent, and it has no battlements or heraldic skyline. Fortalice, getting controversial now. I think, well, me and my colleagues now think that the term isn't another word for a tower. It is probably the word for the first enclosure, later known as the inner close or the inner court. Barnkin technically means a livestock enclosure, and it may have been used to describe the court of a lower ranked house. Battling, it usually means skyline decoration. Now, the thing you see here is Holbar. It's called a tower house, it's called all sorts of things built for defence. But as I say at the bottom, not only is rank crucial, but the purpose of the building is crucial. And Holbar fits a type. And the type is the house with a very large kitchen and very few cellars. A large hall, but very few chambers to live in. That type is the hunting lodge, because you don't need to store the food, you're catching it and eating it. You need hospitality, but most people are under canvas. And you'll find there's a number of houses you can identify as hunting lodges. Whether or not Holbar was one, it fits the type. Then Chamber of Death. I'm sure all you ladies and gentlemen know that, but it's still misread. It's the Scottish audience chamber, and in the state apartment it's the real seat of power. And the last one is the lettermeat hall, the leftover meat hall. It's where the household eats apart from the family, usually in the 17th century, but you find it in the late 16th century. Now, building sequence. I want to suggest to you that these things actually aren't all built at the same time, they evolve. So here is Naughton, drawn in Fife, drawn in 1794. And it shows, I've numbered it 1 up there. 1 is the enclosure. 2 is the hall, because if you think of what Chris Taberham found about down in the Borders, the hall probably predates the tower, because the tower is where the family withdraw to. 3, the tower, and 4, the round one, as I will explain later why, I'm suggesting to you that's probably the guest tower. So if you look at how these all come together in a place like Typology, you've got here a reconstruction of Tawan. This is the inner court. You can see for the main houses lying towards the back. You can see the galleries. You can see the guest tower, the bottom right, the circular one, the ancestral tower, and what's upside down called chamber is in fact the fore entry, or usually called that. If you take a bigger house, so you've got a really good surviving outer court, here's Dalkeith, drawn by Sletzer. The Sletzer drew the plan, and he drew this perspective. In the back, in the inner court, you can see the tower. The main house is back on the left. The hall is on the left, hard. The gallery is on the right, and offices along the front, and the fore entry in the middle. On the outer close, what you have are stables, offices, service, what they call sluttery, and above all, the gurnals, because you paid your rents in the outer court. You're paying rents into barns, because you pay rents in kind. So, what do they look like? Well, I've just done a few. Here is Kilburney from McGibbon and Ross. There's the tower at the back, and this is added as the main house. This is Robert Riddle's drawing a bog hole, and that's all that's left, the outer enclosure and the main house behind. Nothing like that is left now, just a bit of that stair tower. And the gallery. Here is the inner court at Dunotter. There's the gallery here. Reconstructed. It's the biggest room in Dunotter by far, and below it are guest chambers all the way along, and you find that pattern also in FRSE and elsewhere. So if that's what we're looking at or for, one of the odd things is the overlooked subordinate tower. Most country seats of the first and second rank had at least one or more than one. There's Monymail here. This is a reconstruction from a contemporary manuscript of how they rebuilt Cuthally. I'm certain it wasn't as orthogonal as that, but you have the ancestral tower, you have a family tower, you have a guest tower, and then you've got all sorts of various stuff around. Here's Lethington, of course, the ancestral tower, and one of the others. You will find them in the plans of many houses, like, say, Traquair, when they are not evident from the exterior. And I think we have a very seriously misplaced emphasis upon the ancestral tower as the only thing that matters. It's not. Then we have a problem with language, particularly this so-called alphabet, Z plan, L plan. Here is Barhome, there is Balbegno. If you go on site, look closely at the building, it's quite clear there was a wee tower in Barhome, there's a stair in there, and it's been extended in the 16th century. It is very much more obvious in Balbegno how the original tower was extended and the tower was cut down so they could insert their vaulted ceiling. If you look at what they call the Z plans of Mingus, Hatton, Earl's Hall, they all have a rectangular tower at the middle that has been adapted and extended. And therefore the so-called alphabet description, I find nowadays to be unhelpful. Now, I'm not going to read that to you, ladies and gentlemen, because you can read it far faster than I can. I was told a few years ago by this society that this was quite normal as a methodology, but in the years since I last spoke here, I found it is not normal, or it's not commonly followed in that pattern. The crucial issue, once you get a hypothesis up, is you go back to the building and check it out. So I'm going to take each one of these and illustrate it before I get to the case studies. So the first thing is construction analysis. What I'm looking for are those. We're trying to think our way into the way the masons and the architects then thought. If you like, in architectural terms, we're looking at structure or firmness, as in commodity, firmness, and delight. If the building was built from scratch, all of these would be illogical. So if you look at this house here, what you have, quite obviously, there's no obvious ancestral tower. It could be there, but it's not obvious. There is evidence of a hole here because the gables of these two gables go right up to the roof space. They're exactly parallel. Squint door entrances. So one side is straight and the other side is squint. You don't do that. That's been because something's altered. Huge disruption about here. And of course, in this house, we're missing an awful lot of stairs. And the probability is on all floors That is where the main turnpike was. Down here, in this tower, if you look at it, there's no stair here. There's a squint corridor here. What's a squint corridor trying to miss? That's the question. And the answer is there's a chimney stack going up here. So that it's avoiding it. Usually, squint corridors always have a cause like that. But I put a little circle in here on the schedule of curiosities. I think there's probably the remains of a staircase in there, which would explain why there's no vertical circulation now surviving. So if you look at the Lord Chancellor's house, this is otherwise known as Riddle's Court, but we now know it was Alexander Seton's house and called the Lord Chancellor's house. This is one of a drawing of one of 5 floors, and it shows the extent to which there may be structurally significant points on each floor. What I'm going to draw attention to are 3 things. One, curiously, there's a window here facing the courtyard from a main chamber. None there, none there, none there, none there. That's the only block that has a main window looking over the courtyard. That makes it significant. Access to here. Patrick Geddes and pals sort of ripped the walls apart here. Very difficult to know exactly how did you get in here. Was it linked north or was it not? Just how much has been removed. And again, there's something deeply serious here. I'll come back to that. And then finally, because we're on the top floor, how do you get access to that room there? Because we know that staircase is Victorian. See how it's cut through the wall? Therefore, before Victorian times, how on earth did you get into that room? It's sort of, tell you, Riddle's got a real pain. And so you do all the drawings, you superimpose the drawings to see what might be revealed by one floor above the other. And I'm drawing attention to 3 things. One is what I've already mentioned, namely most of what you see there is Patrick Geddes period. Complete mess of knowing what the original access and circulation was. We found the remains of what we think is a turnpike stair in there. However, all the floors show that. And in the manuscripts, Alistair Ross found a thing called the Southwest Turnpike. There it is, and you came in that way. Other things on this floor are this. It's very, very difficult to know how you make access going downhill to the lower stories. You haven't just got the stair down to the close, which is that one, down to the garden. You've got that. And you've got disruption there on each floor. There is at least the strong possibility there's a straight stair, or was a straight stair there, all the way up. Now, it's great having these wonderful CFA computer superimpositions, but you don't always have that. You may just have National Trust drawings. So here we are in Haddo House, looking for the original House of Kelly. And up there, in the middle of it all, you see that cutaway squint passage corridor. You just don't do that from scratch. Somebody is doing something. And then if you look at the section here, it becomes evident that the House of Kelly survives in the middle of Haddo House to at least 3 stories. And what William Adam has been doing is been trying to fit around new circulation within existing walls. So, typology, what is typical? We have very, very little comparative study in Scotland compared to what my colleagues have in Europe. So I've been looking at dimensions. It's clear from this. It is the Towers of Fife, taken from the Royal Commission report, and the Towers of the West March, taken from Alistair Maxwell Irving. Looking at dimensions, wall thickness is diminished radically. There is just no doubt about that. Once stairs and chambers are no longer within them. In the Scottish Chateau, I suggested some typical wall thicknesses, and when the book came out, people had their usual laugh at that. Discovery of new manuscripts has confirmed they were spot on. Courtyard, which was built in 1556, was built to a wall thickness of 4.6 inches. And Auchinarvey, built in the 1630s, wall thickness of 3 feet. And gradually, as we begin to understand the typologies, we'll know more. The value of this is when you're looking at a building to know what is unusual, what is special, particularly what is anachronistic. I think there's a very strong case after doing this analysis for saying Hodham is at least 200 years earlier than it is thought to be, and come along in about 100 years earlier. So there's questions here. Then if you're doing commodity, firmness and delight, i.e. architecture, that was firmness. What about function or commodity? Well, look at this example. Interesting one. This is the Palace of Stirling. I think its interpretation misses some key points. What you have in Scotland is the 5-chamber state apartment, as in Burgundy. That is to say, the outer or guard chamber, the inner chamber, chamber of dais if you like, the bed chamber, the closet and the wardrobe. Now if you look abroad, particularly to England, the closet and the wardrobe are major public buildings. The king or queen meets people in them. Now we had them here. There is Jury's, whatever it is, 1720 map of Stirling, outer chamber, inner chamber, bed chamber, closet and wardrobe. Here is the consorts, or the queens, outer, inner, bed chamber, closet and wardrobe, and maybe in their oratory. Now, this matters because, first of all, you need privy stairs. The people need to approach the monarch privately, and you need to get the sluttery out. You don't take bedpans through the main chambers. Well, the stair is there, and the Queen's privy stair is there. The stair is still there, but look for the plan, and it's not there. It's because it's not, the function of it hasn't been fully understood. As it happens, the private nature of these chambers in Scotland is probably distinctive within Europe, and therefore something worth making something of. And then checking on old drawings. The next thing, Stuart Cruden, if you remember the Scottish castle, loved this building. He praised its majesty and its austerity, standing alone in the landscape. It never did. Look at it. It had a very fine inner court. And Cruden's misunderstanding, I think, is a not unusual typical misreading of the past. So the next thing I want to mention is studying alignment. Now here we are, very smart street of 1819 terraced houses by Dundee city architect David Nee. In these houses, axis is crucial. Look at it. You're going in there, and as soon as you're in there, you have to turn right. The building behind is at a really quite an acute angle. Why? Because what this is a Georgian front onto the back of the original medieval buildings facing Dundee's Cowgate. And it's all still there, huge thick walls, aboriginal stairs, and all sorts of funny things. So alignment is part of the great fun. The next thing is patterns, looking for similarities. I was asked to consider Niddry's inner court. Now Niddry is here. And looking around, you found considerable similarity with that, which had been excavated with that, and with that, and with Hodham up there. But the excavation showed the inner court coming like that. Having a look at all this, we went back onto site and said, this is odd, and we found a rocky escarpment there, and I think the owners may well commission a wee bit of archaeology there, because it's almost certainly, you can see how the rock has been cut to provide access into something behind. So sometimes looking for patterns is great fun. So that leads me to case study 1, Broch. Just a few case studies, so you can see that I'm actually going genuinely barking. You can see what Broch is. It's a long way away in a country of which we know little. And it's a total mess, Broch. It's in a shocking state. I could have shown you hundreds of photographs like that. And looking from the outside, things emerge. You can see how that window has been inserted. You can see how the battlements are also inserted. Inside the house, as you can guess from there, it's a cross between a Victorian hunting lodge and a Georgian villa, and entirely derelict. Well, following the route, you're looking at old pictures, you find old pictures like this. And it's a much grander house. All the battlements are now gone up in the top. But it's curious. Partly, on these photographs, look at that line there. there's a wall head running there, and it's very clear up there. It is probably the line of the building before the battlement did it up in probably 1820. Now, in the archives, they had this plan. Two things about it. I'm not going to make you read it because I find it impossible to read a hollow plan like that. You cannot imagine space. You cannot get your head into it. But the crucial thing about this one is that you see this has all been tinted in here, showing as hatching. And I think that indicates in 1820 the work they were planning to do. So it's new. And if you look at it, all the walls in this centre bit are very, very thin, say those around the turnpike stair. So here it is filled in. It makes much more sense. Here is Brock Lodge, and what's very clear are the two very solid wings, and then this thing in the middle. Now there's a few things about this thing in the middle. Firstly, there's no door from these wings outside. These are all windows. Save for that, whatever's up there, small room or tack room, all the doors go into this. The argument is it's a courtyard. The Georgian partitions are extraordinarily flimsy, which argues that the turnpike stair is an older structure. And the circulation is very tortuous. Imagine coming in here and you'd go along there and you'd have to go through the drawing room to get to the library and so on. It's tortuous because the designer is dealing with existing fabric. So what was originally there? And I want to suggest to you it was a ha. Typical ha is two parallel blocks of buildings across the courtyard. Here's two. They vary in size, but if you know Shetland, you know particularly Vela, ha. Vela built this huge Victorian thing in the middle of the court. That's what dominates it. And I think that's exactly what the owner did at Brock. He was doing a subordinate Vela. So the point I'm making is that houses evolve if there's money and fashion. So look at this one. Now this is a small tower extended. The tower is there. And I think it was cut down. And this little tower was truncated because inside the house that tower goes down another story, become a two-story thing. When new chambers are added here, above the inner court wall, facing the garden. I think that's the inner court wall here. You can see just traces of relieving arches. So there are clearly windows looking into the garden. I think all that took place in the 17th century because look at the quality of the new stonework. It's ashlar. Very like nearby Arbuthnot. And the new windows are superb. Beautiful things. So what he's doing is creating a mansion from a small tower and court. And the court, of course, is crucial. Now, it brings us to Arbuthnot. Now, it's a much grander house. It's a first-rank house. It's the ancient paternal seat of the Viscounts Arbuthnot, who managed to domesticate it entirely in the 18th century, as you can see here. Since then, even the gardens to the west have lost their form, and the entrance from the north has vanished. Here is it in about 1791. There's the gardens. You see them all walled. There's probably the back court here. And the original entrance almost certainly was up there. The entrance now is down the Great Avenue. So what is there in Arbuthnot? Well, I can only show you a sample, but if you go into the roof, you find this wonderful ashlar post roof. So you know where you are. You're into the 17th century. That's not a problem. You get a magnificent dormer window, but that's, if you look at it, it's certainly not in its original place. It doesn't fit. So this is a historic building with bits that have been changed, and the building's been homogenized, etc. So here is the plan I'm given, computer plan, showing it as it is now, not showing the north wing. And by the time you've extracted it and looked at any other report in the Royal Commission or wherever, you begin to get a picture of a house, which is of a courtyard, of course. And I think I'm going to be, I'll have to abbreviate this. There's a tower there. It's meant to be the kitchen tower. The kitchen fireplace in there that almost certainly came from there. when they put the kitchen fireplace in, it blocked a stair in that corner. Nothing fits in this tower. I mentioned to you earlier, we think there's a turnpike stair there. But the main entrance, to go back, you expect it being Georgian, you go straight through, because that's what Georgians do. Look at it. There's the entrance there. You see it's on a squint. You go through the front door, turn sharp right to get through. That tells you that there's masonry in the way. They can't do it. What they're doing is reformatting something earlier. This is the block I said earlier, above which we found the evidence of the tower. What else to say here? We think we can't find the ancestral tower. Too much change. But that is a seriously medieval piece of work with wonderful windows here, which in the later 17th century, when they were erected Viscount, they completely changed. Because you come in here to a lovely 17th century door and a great processional 17th century stair going up there, and then through a set of enfilades in that way. At the back, you've got a very odd tower with two alignments, that alignment and that alignment. During the works, they found all sorts of things. Beneath the Harling, the building is entirely ashlar, except for that. I mean, a huge amount of money they must have spent. The ashlar will be late 17th century. And that is sort of our provisional inclusion, because this is a hypothesis. We think the entrance is through there. We note that the odd alignment takes you directly to there, so maybe these two towers are on the outside of the wall. We can't tell. We're very uncertain what the origin of that building is, and indeed that, except we know that they are all there by the 17th century. So the next issue, which I'd like to throw at you, is the raising of the perron. This is so typical of the period 1750 to 1840. Here's Invergowrie House. There's a wee tower here. It's extended in the 16th century, again 17th century. The main entrance is here. And William Byrne comes along in 1836 and he raises the perron to that level there, and round the north side you enter straight into the Piano Nobile. So you've reduced the original entrance floor to a basement. This is very typical, as the next case study will show you. A border country house. It's Edward Bloor Gothic, and I was asked to try and establish the age of this building. Well, we were told in the commission that it was a Georgian farmhouse. Well, it has two saloons like this, and I can't think of a single farmhouse that has a saloon of that size. One there, one there. Secondly, look at that building. That's a stair there. These are wee chambers. Where are the great chambers? We don't know, but there's a huge building running behind. And then in the bottom, down there, there's that window. And there's lots of those windows going all the way around. Lighting a lower story. So go and have a look at the drawings, and they give you this. There is the missing story. There, and there's the plan of it. And the plan is of a vaulted service corridor serving vaulted cellars all the way along. Now that is the pattern of late 16th, early 17th century, if you like, ground floor entrances. We know there was a spittle on site, and I think there is enough evidence to believe the spittle is still there. So, moving on to a lovely tower. Is it a tower with splendid interiors, which is called an L-plan tower? This is Delgaty, of course. Here is the Royal Commission's plan of it, and it shows all sorts of things. An L-plan tower with later accretions. The inner court has more or less gone. But the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, L-plan towers aren't built like that. We have a certain number of genuine, original, late 14th century L-plan towers, and they don't look like that. So the probability arose that Delgaty is actually three towers. One, the oldest here, two built on the end, and then infilling three. The original tower, single chamber per floor, probably, as old as you want to make it. The later tower, originally two chambers per floor, built in the west end, possibly early 16th century. And then these are certainly late 16th century additions to make this huge parallelogram. The wall with red, however, contains holes, and this stair is not typical. It's too big for that period. So we go up there and we have fun. This is Dr. Walker here, and the evidence seems to show that the original tower had a small stair there and maybe one there. The secondary tower, certainly the small stair there, but the public one wasn't obvious, but there's been huge disturbance around there. But when we went upstairs, we found a piece of plywood blocking that passage there, and so David Walker decided to go in with a lot of encouragement, and we found that. It's almost certainly an oratory. The architecture is the same as one of the vaulted rooms at Delgety, but the fact is it was the structure that told us it's too thick. You don't need a structure that thick. It's going to contain something, and it contains an oratory. So moving swiftly ahead, here we have, again, it's called a tower house of McKean. Well, I think that's an inadequate explanation. If you look at it in detail, in plan, that's what you find. A tower there, which may be the first one, another tower, which either that's first and second or second and first here, and then in the 1580s, they add a tower on here. They put a stair on to join these two together, but the stair is at the floor level of this one. So there's, like Dalvey, which I showed you, there's more floors in that block than this. So the stair levels don't fit this at all. And this goes up. Then to make access from the new stair, they cut these squint corridors through, all the way through. And the final thing in the McKean story is probably about 1610. They built the most beautiful ceremonial staircase here. If you know the one at Carriston, which is not far away, Carriston will be, don't know, 20 miles away. It is the only other one I've seen like Carriston is here at McKean. So I want to move now to spotting the ghost, because the problem is what happens when something has vanished entirely. One thing to find and interpret, but if it's gone. So the task was to establish the nature and building evolution of Duntarby. And you should all know Duntarby because you can see it from the M9 or the M90 going to Stirling. It's been the home of the Durham family since the 14th century. Now, McGibbon and Ross turned this up, and the way you would read it, the way I used to read it, was that it was a 17th century villa facing south and lovely gardens. But there was odd things. What's that? What's that? The main entrance? Through the garden? I don't think so. So doing the usual stuff, going to look at aerial photographs and ancient plans. These are different, these plans, interestingly. There it says barns, barnyards down there. This is not on that one. But in both of them, it does look as though the main entrance will be from the north. And this here implies that the inner court was probably at the back. I'll come back to that. Marilyn Brown's new book has identified that as, and you can just see them on this plan, as waterworks and ponds. And down here, obviously you've got a garden, but down here it looks as though it's divided into two with steps. And on the aerial, you can just make out there's a very distinctive shape there. The current condition is the pits, and the northwest tower, which was that, has collapsed. This is really a repeat of the oddities, that stair and that door. Peculiar. So it wasn't as peculiar as this gable here. Absolutely bananas. Because look at that. That's far too big for a window. That's, whatever that is not a window. Then you get these small windows, which are typical windows of stairs, but it's not the same stair. They're different. And above these stair windows, you get normal windows. And then this joint in the masonry stops here. So they've extended from here round over that. So, you know, in watching how a building evolves, this goes on and on. Here are some decent drawings from the inside and the outside that illustrate what I've been saying. The only thing I want to add is from the inside, the lovely wide stair here is up to the first floor. There are chambers above, and they've got their own private turnpike stair in one corner. That implies this is public. that implies this has become a lake hole. So somewhere you entered a lake hole in Dundee to go up that stair and enter that way or this way as you saw fit. So this is the schedule of curiosities, initial drawing showing what I'm trying to hunt down. The big chimney stack has clearly been added. It's not part of the original fabric because almost always where you see it projecting out, it's an addition. There it is there. Heaven knows what's happening in this area. It's a real mess. In the third floor, in the 17th century, put in a wee turnpike stair. Can you see that they cut away the wall to accommodate it, just there? Then, here's one of the guest chambers, and with its turnpike stair. Look at that narrow thing here. It's almost certain that that has been added, because that is a very curious thing to do. Finally, on all floors, you've got mess in this corner, holes, projections, erosions, all the way up. So we're trying to look at it using Royal Commission drawings and computer drawings and comparing them. And there is the door I keep on referring to. There indeed is another door. What is very clear from this is me trying to take the structure up, is that at some point, probably in the 17th century, they cleared away the entire structure above first floor level and started again, put a new house in here, because there was just nothing relating to the big, massive structures you see below. So I then looked at the north front, and it's surprisingly windowless. That's a drawing by Alexander Archer. If I'd discovered that before I did it myself, I'd have saved myself a lot of trouble. But the fact is, it's surprisingly windowless and it's dominated by a chimney stack. That typically is what you would expect for the facade to the inner court, because you don't want windows facing the inner court, you want windows facing the sun, the garden, and anywhere else. So the next two drawings is, how did you get into this house? Where is the entrance? Where is the main access? Etc. And on the north front, there's the chimney stack, the added chimney stack here. All of that masonry really seriously disturbed all the way up. That's the north front. And the south front, there is the door I keep on referring to. There is the extended wall. I forgot to show you an elevation. Maybe if I've got time, I'll just quickly go back. That drawing. This drawing, you see how it looks as though that's the edge, but it's not. Look at that, going way out. So that wall extended that way. We don't know how much, we don't know how big, but it wasn't a clean line. So there's clearly something out there, and the door led into it. So the question is there something big over here, because we're still entirely missing the ancestral tower. So doing the historic dating bit, very briefly, we think of what is left. We're starting at ground floor level with that light blue, which is 15th century. Then you add one tower, but they're very different towers. Then you add another tower. Then if you go upstairs, you get a rebuilding of this facade. And going upstairs again, the rebuilding not just of this facade, but of that facade as well, in the 17th century. And the final bit is adding the garden stairs and turnpike, which go down from this lovely new apartment down to the garden on the south. So where were the towers that this block was extended from? Well, we don't know. It's a ghost. But almost certainly it's there. And we got the missing stair at the back. But as in all of these things, this is the end of the report. We now know, if there were to be more archaeology, where we would like to look. We know where we can direct people to look because it makes sense. So my final case study tonight is a Laird's house in Angus. And it looks like that. Now, you know, ladies and gentlemen, these wonderfully explicit and beautifully produced computer drawings that tell you so much about the building. That's the house. And you'd think, not very much there, and it's, oddly enough, it's typical of a number of Laird's houses in Angus. I've now done 3. And I was asked to look at whether or not it could have a new access from the north here. Well, the computer drawing, which I have filled up. Now, I ought to explain, filling up drawings to me is crucial, because for a start, you begin to populate the room, to begin to understand the shapes and spaces. You see orientations. If that were all just lines on a piece of paper, it's much more difficult. What becomes immediately apparent is you've got two wings here and a different alignment to that. What I've coloured yellow is buildings we knew were Victorian, we had evidence for. There, that, and all that. So you're beginning to strip it back. As it happens, we later found that that was Victorian as well. We're trying to look at thicknesses and alignments and curiosities, things that don't work. One is that. This is a stair tower. It's clearly an old stair tower, but look, it's got a squint corridor going into a party wall. Whatever else, it's unlikely to be built like that from scratch. Secondly, the current entrance is from here, from the south. And finally, look at the north front. What's that? Why did it go back there? Why are these walls thicker than those? It's that sort of thing. I tell you, I can bore for Britain on this. You should hear my wife on the subject. This is me filling it up. These drawings are going to be bent and squidged, and I'm apologising for that. I couldn't lay them properly flat, and they haven't been unfolded for about, well, since they were made. But the whole process of trying to fill in what is really hollow helps you to, well, helps me to see oddities. Look at that, up there. What's that doing? That wall is on a wrong alignment to that. That's what it's doing. What's this doing? You see how it's curved, cut away and curved. So it's full of that sort of thing. Here is the full drawing of that floor. You see the curving is exaggerated because the paper is not straight. But on the first floor, you have the very obvious echo of a turnpike stair here. You have what is possibly the same here. We're on the floor above the one I showed you a minute ago. And in this area, on both floors, there's real disturbance. Here again is the main entrance to the house, and there's the main turnpike stair, etc., etc. Now, in 1862, these lairds decided to ask Petty and Kinnear to make them a bit more grandiloquent, and this is what Petty and Kinnear came up with. And what is absolutely typical is that this isn't part of the old building, that we're going to relegate the old building to servants' quarters. So, like Lethendy, for example. So here it is. This is the new building, and there's the old house. You can probably recognize the lineaments from the drawings I've already shown you. What they've done is they've regularized the alignments, and they've regularized wall thicknesses. So sometimes using an old plan can be difficult because you can't trust it entirely. But what it does tell you are two or three things. One is there's an open service access court to the back. That's important because at the moment this is now a complete story higher, and the planners are saying, but that was always like that, but we know it wasn't. You used to be able to have to get carts and all the services you need. Here is interesting because in this tower area, that's been used as a wine cellar. And finally, well, with me at any rate, you see things that you don't see before. Because of the colours here, this suddenly became apparent that that block was completely separate. So there is one of the main structural walls of the house, and here it is freestanding at the back. What on earth is that up to? Well, going inside and having fun, guess what? We find another wonderful ashlar post roof, 17th century, so that's useful. And in one of the sections, the 1998 sections of the east wing, it's clear the outer wall is thicker than the inner wall, presumably originally a courtyard wall, and then it's inhabited. And you can see the junction there. Scotland, England does this a lot. Scotland does this very little. That implies alteration and probably later occupation, implying rebuilding. So, stripping all these plans back to the bare essentials, and doing analysis of the thickest wall and all that sort of stuff, from that you get to that, and trying to, from these funny little corners, take in the wall at the angles they are, just to experiment, because that's what we're doing. And then you've still got a problem up here, and up here, let me think where it is, yeah, there, that wall is harled in the roof space, that's 3 stories up. There is the turnpike stair shadow, and there is the other mess. And then this stair is still looking uncomfortable. So going into the roof space, what was wonderful to find was this pavilion roof, huge pavilion roof over the block at the back. And going down into the upper story of this block at the back, it is a saloon. It's a large, grand, 3-windowed saloon with a cove ceiling. It's possibly William Adam. It's that quality of space. It's been divided up into 2 bedrooms, but the coving goes through it. And it's been built at the back of the original main house. And that roof is concealed within the later baronial roof of the entire house. So therefore, coming to an end, what is a possible evolution of this house? It seems to me to be no doubt that the original entrance was from the north. There were 2 towers, one here and one there, with turnpike stairs there and there. There are 2 wings. I'm not sure which is first. My instincts are the wings come first and these towers are added because of the nature of how orthogonal all this is. Whereas this is, if you like, more organic. We have no idea what's out there. Nor do we have much idea in what I'm calling the main house here, because it's been stripped out and gutted. But originally, you would expect cellars on the ground floor and principal apartments on the first floor and the roof above it. Change 1. You've still got an entrance from the north. This remains relatively unchanged, but this and this changes. This turnpike is replaced by a lovely 17th century staircase, scale and plat, going up here. But the cellars have been taken out of this. So if you know Liberton House, ladies and gentlemen, the same thing happened probably about the same date, the early 1610s. They've taken out the cellars and they've created mainstream apartments. So they've had to raise the ceiling. And they've clearly had to raise the ceiling above. And you can see all the evidence of that in the Harling on the outside, where all this disturbance has taken place. And then at this time, almost certainly, they put in the ashlar post roof, which I showed you, which is over there. And then the big change, early 18th century, I think. And I'm using the Peddy and Kinnear drawing to explain it. We have a tower there, we have a tower there. They put on an early 18th century saloon here. In order to do so, they've installed a new stair here, which is scale and plat, the main stair of the house. And they've got a new entrance coming in from the south. They've had to remove that turnpike because it's now in the way. And they rebuild it here because the turnpike is clearly, 2-story turnpike is clearly old, but it's in the wrong place and in a Victorian covering. And I think that explains that. The later phases I'm not really going into, but you get an extension out here, then eventually that gets completely built out, then it gets built out there. And these 2 wings are semi-gutted and put into family use. This one says laundry. What I've drawn here, however, is a pavilion roof, because like this building, if you go into the roof space, at some point, probably in the early 18th century, that has a pavilion roof, and the question emerges, why? And I think it's got a pavilion roof because it's up against the tower. So, what do you think that Timothy Pont might have seen? Because he visited it in the 1580s. This is my best guess at this stage. Now, the scale is exactly that of the current computer drawings. Here is the house as it is now. Clearly, I've made that bigger because there are the 2 chimney stacks where they were. Here is the entrance. This here is what I think is the removed turnpike there, which has been brought along this wing here. And that there is a turnpike we found the shadow in going up there. And you can see the disturbance to the windows and the sort of vaguely unrealistic appearance it now has. So that is my best guess. So I have some conclusions, and they are these. In the Scottish chateau, I suggested that we had lost 6/7 of all our Renaissance houses, a greater demolition than any country in Europe. Well, that can't be right, because many of them survive in later structures. We'd never look at that and think there's a Renaissance house inside, but as I've tried to show you, I think there is. I've tried to suggest to you that an architectural approach to standing archaeology is based upon trying to work out how the original masons and architects thought and what they intended to achieve, and of course using some of the architectural techniques. Some of that can be interpreted from plans. Overall, however, this approach combines structure and materials with culture and social change. It attempts to establish types so that exceptions can be spotted. So from the analysis of commodity, which is changing use, firmness, which is structure, and delight, which is culture, I think, I'm afraid, that there is a lot of revisionism that we now ought to be undertaking in Scotland. And much of the revisionism we need may lie in later seeming houses. Thank you very much. Earl Marshall says goodbye.